I fell down, I broke my wrist, I'll be fine. I just went to a conference last weekend, and I felt like having a sign around my neck that said, yes, I broke my wrist, and I'll be fine, because everyone had to ask me, what'd you do? Anyway, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here tonight. No. Maybe you'll be able to see the screen a little better once I get some other slides up. But my background, just to add a little layer to what Susan said, is being a plant nerd from childhood, and then sort of realizing that plants are medicines, and then having my mind blown by that thought, because it never occurred to me that like yarrow could do something to reduce the fever or help with a digestive upset. And so as a young hippie, I studied herbs a lot, went into business, went to college and became a sound engineer and worked in the music business in San Francisco, motorcycle, leather jacket, it was fun, I was in my 20s. But the herb thing kind of was always in the background, and so in my early 30s, I attended one of the few schools for herbal medicine in Northern California called the California School of Herbal Studies, and took a really in-depth training on clinical herbalism. So when you have the plants, how to assess someone's health, and then make recommendations using plant medicine. You may not know this, but the United States is one of the very, very few countries in the world where herbal medicine is not considered part of medical care. And so it was a long shot in the late 80s to decide to do that as a career. The first time I did my taxes as an herbalist, the person who prepared them for me said she was going to give me some free advice, which is that this was like in 1990, that herbs were a trend that had peaked, and it was over, and I should find something else to do for a living. I would just like to say to her, wherever she is, you're wrong. So if you, so anyway, so those are just to kind of give you context. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is some of my favorite plants that if you're out and about, you're going to see them. Maybe some of them came a little earlier. Tell you a little bit about the history of these plants. And not because I want you to hear some quaint, cute stories, but because these things now are backed up by quite a bit of research. So if you feel like you need science to believe that plants heal, which is really kind of crazy if you think about it, given that it's been the primary form of medicine since the dawn of time. One of my friends has 2 gardens, and one of it is all medicinal herbs, and the other is all poisonous plants. And so she shows people the medicinal garden, and then she goes over to the poisonous plants, and people are like, they believe everything she says about the poisonous plants, and they're a little skeptical about medicinal plants. So she makes it very clear that they'd like to maybe re-examine that set of beliefs. Just to give you a little bit of context about this, and I know this is a whole series about living in this area, so I might be preaching to the choir, but the Appalachians, really the oldest mountain range on Earth, and it runs from where we are right now all the way up into Nova Scotia, but it's unique because it has so many different species of plants growing in it, and in particular, I have the red circle there. Botanists refer to the southern Appalachians as a specifically unique area because we have plants that, and we're going to just pretend climate change isn't happening when I tell you this because it's too complicated to change things every few days with what's happening with the weather, but plants that grow from here all the way down into South America, they're more tropical in nature. This is about as far north as they usually can survive. After this, it gets too cold. So that's one group of plants that we find here. There's another group that likes cold weather, and this is about as far south as they can stand to be. And then there's a third group that we call endemics that are really just found in this region. So I picked out some plants from each of those categories to talk about with you tonight. But I also wanted to just say that, and this is where I say my thing about the apothecary of North America, the Appalachians are one of the world's most botanically diverse temperate forest ecosystems on the planet. So the climate here, the little pockets, the cove forests, make it just especially perfect for all this plant diversity that we see. And this is something that comforts me because I will never know all the plants that grow around here. And I know some of you who hike around and try to identify plants might feel the same way. So we have lots of plant species, lots of them endemics, and then we have all these different little plant communities that you see up here on the board. But I also want to just tell you a little bit about something that helps us understand how the plants are used here. That there's something that's called floristic disjunction. And you don't really need to know too much about that, other than what it means is that due to glacial activity, pockets of plants were here in the southern Appalachians, a little bit in the Ozarks, and then in northern China. And when the glaciers came down and then receded, those pockets weren't scraped away. And so that's one of the theories about why we have such plant diversity here, is because it's kind of like the concentration, and then as you go farther north and west, you still find the plants, but not in the kind of abundance that we have here. But the other thing that makes this especially interesting to me, hopefully to you, is that when the Iron Curtain went down around China in the 70s, and some of you may remember that Nixon went to China, it was a big deal, and we were starting to have cultural exchange. One of the things that people who were interested in plants of this region noticed is that the traditional Chinese medicine system was using the same group of plants that the Cherokee were using. And in some cases, they use them exactly the same way, in some cases completely different. So for me, as an herbalist, I learned how to use plants in the context of body systems. There's herbs for the lungs, there's herbs for the digestive system. They have a totally different way of assessing plants and what they'll do in China. So a lot of us who use herbs medicinally had to study Chinese medicine so we can understand this whole other array of things that the plants do. So I just find that fascinating to think about people who lived in Kawi Valley using plants in a certain way, and people up in Siberia and the mountains of northern China using the same group of plants. So I'm going to point out some of those as we go through them. And probably, this is kind of like our, I was going to say Taylor Swift, but maybe not, of the Appalachian Mountains. This is like the media darling, right, of the Appalachians, ginseng. And the story of ginseng coming into like the large-scale use is pretty interesting, because although indigenous people definitely used it as a tonic, they would boil it up, they would use it basically to increase their stamina, which is what we would think about using it for as well. The species that grows here is a different species than is found in China. And nobody really who was involved with any kind of global trade or anything knew that the plant that grew here was here. It wasn't something that was harvested and exported. And then a Jesuit monk was up somewhere in Canada, and he was noticing the people harvesting and making tea out of this root. And he was reading a description of some plants that were used in China by another Jesuit monk, and he was like, these two things sound alike. So he took some samples, and I don't know what they looked like when they got to China, but he sent them to China in the 1600s, so we can only guess. Maybe he did an herbarium pressing. And then they realized that this was the same plant, and it's one of the most exalted plants in Chinese medicine. And the reason something like this is exalted is because in their culture, traditionally, your status didn't have anything to do with your job or your wealth or your inheritance or your family lineage. It had to do with how old you were. So the older you got, the more revered you were. Their whole medical system was organized around longevity. And that's why now we hear a lot about herbs that are from China, because we're getting old and people are getting really, a lot of people are more interested in plants to be used in this way. And ginseng was one of the main plants that they used for that. And not because it's like speed, like you take some and you want to clean the house. What it does is it improves your body's ability to respirate and digest. And so in traditional Chinese medicine, one of the things they say is that you know, you're born with a certain amount of constitutional health that you inherit from your parents, and then that kind of allows you to like not pay attention to your health at all until you get older, and then things start happening, and then you start paying more attention to your health as you age. And so using ginseng long-term helps your body create more reserves through oxygen and nutrition. And so ginseng is never going to be like an espresso that you take it and it's a cumulative thing. The more you take it, the better you're oxygenated and the better you're extracting nutrients from the food you eat. So this is considered a tonic herb that slowly improves your body's overall function. So they started exporting this ginseng to China. In fact, almost all the ginseng that's even cultivated now in North America, and there's quite a bit of it being cultivated, is exported to China because of the demand there is so great. There's a whole tradition, obviously, in the South of being, you know, hunt and sang and looking for ginseng and collecting the roots. I have a lot of neighbors down in Reagan County who you know, remember as a child that they would go collect ginseng roots and then sell them, and that's how they got money to buy Christmas presents. So that, because in the fall is when you harvest the root. Unfortunately, there's a lot of poaching done of wild ginseng now, but it is one of the most valuable medicinal plants. A pound of ginseng for a broker, to sell it to a broker, you would make between $300 and $600 a pound. So that's a pretty good exchange, right? But it is an incredible plant, and it is one of the plants that you can still see. Now, I have a friend who's really into plant conservation, which is also something I really pay a lot of attention to. And he says whenever he finds this plant in the woods, when he's hiking, it's, you see its botanical name is quinquefolius, meaning 5 leaves. He pinches off the 2 lower leaves of every plant that he sees, so that if poachers come, they'll be like, no, it's not a good idea. We have to do it uniformly, right? So anyway, I share that tip with you because, especially if you're, you know, in the national forest or something, you're not going to be collecting plants. So this is just a little look at what the roots look like. And usually the roots that are harvested are 5 to 7 years old. Under cultivation, it's a heavily chemically treated crop. Because it has to be about 5 years old before they harvest it, they don't want to take any chances. So they're spraying with pesticides and herbicides. So if you are going to use this as a medicine, you definitely want to look for woods grown or organic because the others are pretty toxic. And then we have this little baby ginseng that grows in the southern Appalachians. And this plant is about this big. And I looked for it for quite a while. This is one that I took over at the Cove Forest that I hike in sometimes. So it's a little teeny tiny plant. It's in the same plant family and it has the same genus. And by the way, the genus name of this plant, Panax, means panacea, something that cures everything. Because if you're respirating well and you're digesting your food, your body is going to rebuild itself and keep itself strong. Nobody really uses this medicinally, but it's so cute. And I just wanted to include it. But it is a protected plant throughout its habitat. I want to just say something about Virginia creeper. And this is based on years of phone calls that I've received from people saying, hey, I just found a whole field of the most lush ginseng I've ever seen. I'm rich. And then I say, go outside, and because you can see there's some, you know, there's some similarities. 5 leaves, serrated, low to the ground. But if you pulled on the Virginia creeper, you'd find out that it was a vine. So I just give you that botany tip. We have a couple other plants in the same family that are really dramatic that you've probably seen around. This one is called Devil's Walking Stick, or sometimes, can you guys see the screen? Should I march down? Okay. This one is about, these pictures, the plants on the right are about 20 feet tall. This likes to grow in what we call transition zones where sun meets shade. And it's actually a tree. It has bark and it has thorns on the bark, which is why it's called devil's walking stick. And then it produces this big cluster of berries in the fall. And sometimes you see it almost bending the whole plant over because of the berries. But the bark of this tree has compounds, alkaloids in it that are numbing. So that's why it was called toothache tree. People would strip the bark off carefully because of the thorns and then chew on it. And it would numb their teeth and their gums if they had, something going on that was painful. The berries, though, also are an old folk remedy for arthritis and rheumatism that is worse in cold weather. So people would take all those berries and put it with the magic elixir of the Southern Appalachians, and you'll know what that is. Moonshine, exactly. Yeah, canning jar moonshine or brandy, depending on your palate. And then after a couple weeks, then just drinking like about a shot glass full in cold weather when it's damp, like it is around here. It warms the joints and lubricates them so that people don't have that kind of contraction that we feel when it's cold. A lot of people don't like this plant. It has a cluster of greenish white flowers, and then it produces this big bunch of berries. But there's a lot of it along 441. If you drive down towards Reagan County, you see it everywhere. This is another one of, I think, one of our most beautiful plants, the Solomon seal, Polygonatum biflorum. It is one of the plants that comes up early in the year. Its botanical name is referring to the pairs of flowers, so biflorum. So you see there's two flowers coming out of each of the leaf axils, and then berries are produced later. This plant, this is a really interesting example of what I'm talking about the contrast between how plants were used here and how they were used in China. Because for the Cherokee and other indigenous people in this region, this was a food. And they would take the roots, which were tubers, and roast them like a potato. And then either eat them like that, or slice them and dry them on a rock, and then grind them up and use it like flour. So this, if you've ever heard of pemmican, pemmican was kind of like energy bars. Dried berries, nuts, some kind of animal fat, and then they would use the flour made from Solomon seal root to bind it all together. And then carry it with you when you're out walking or hiking or hunting or doing whatever they were doing, and then you could eat it and get some energy. And it's really delicious. It kind of tastes like a peanut with a little overtone of potato. And so wild foods cooking people often use it. But when it first comes up in the spring, it produces a little sprout like this. And if you can stand to cut it at that point, it tastes like asparagus. You can cook it just like asparagus before the leaves completely open. The plant will come back because it is a perennial, so even if you do that, you'll still have it come back. But in China, this was one of their major longevity herbs, the roots. And what they used it for, and no names, but I'm sure there's somebody here who's going to identify, as you get older, you get drier. So this is a plant that makes you juicy. If you drink a tea or you have the tincture extract of it, what it does is it restores essential fluids throughout the body. So one of the things that happens if you're a little fluid deficient is you feel stiff. You can't bend as much. Your ligaments and your tendons contract. So also you'll have less saliva, maybe your eyes will be a little drier, your skin will be drier, your hair, whatever. We'll just leave it at that. Lots of dry things can happen. But the root of this plant is very subtle, but it adds those fluids back in. If you go to like a traditional Chinese herb shop in January, right around the Lunar New Year, which is when they begin the New Year, they will be selling boxes of Solomon seal root with ribbons on them that if you go to someone's house to celebrate New Year, you present them with Solomon seal, and that's like saying, may you live a long life, to give somebody some Solomon seal root. This is also a plant, some of you may have heard, John the Conqueror root. Have anyone ever heard of John the Conqueror root? It's something that enslaved Africans would carry with them for good luck, and it's this plant. It's the root of this plant. And you can still go into some sort of like hoodoo shops in Louisiana and even in parts of Atlanta where they're selling this root for somebody to just carry in their pocket for good luck. There's another plant here that's kind of similar that was for many years called false Solomon seal. And then I guess all the native plant people got together and pitched a fit, and now we call it Solomon's bloom. But it has very similar leaves, but you see the flowers are at the terminal end of the plant as opposed to the Solomon seal where they're coming down between the leaves. And one time one of my students made an observation, shared with me that how she remembered the difference between the two is that a true friend is a friend through and through, and a false friend puts on a good front. So that really helped me because I was always trying to remember the two. This one was, the root was used as a food, but it doesn't have medicinal properties. It doesn't have that restorative thing that I talked about with the other Solomon seal. If you're out in the woods, in early March, you may have seen bloodroot blooming. Usually it's the first spring ephemeral to show up in our forests, and it's very dramatic because everything is very brown, and then you have these white flowers that pop up. And then one of the things that's interesting to me about bloodroot is, and you can see it in the picture on the left, is that when the leaves emerge from the ground, they're like in a tube, and they're vertical. They come up, and after they're completely up and they're still vertical, the flower comes up through the tube and it blooms. And you can kind of see that at the base right there. Do you see how the leaf is kind of wrapped around the stem that the flower is in? And then as soon as the flower starts to bloom, then the leaf kind of flops horizontal. I just think that that's a great plant that I'm going to do. And I also took this picture. Craig and I were out hiking in early spring, and the genus name of this plant is sanguinaria, which means blood. And actually, when you cut the root, it exudes this red juice, which is why it was called bloodroot. Very caustic. If you get it on your skin, it can cause some dermatitis or inflammation. But when I took this picture and looked at it, I thought, this looks like the vascular system. Right? That leaf looks like all the blood vessels. Anyway, this plant has a long history of folk medicine use. If you make an oil extract out of it or a poultice, people would put it on skin growths. And it's really kind of a creepy treatment because it's escharotic. It kills healthy tissue. But what it would do is rob the blood supply of a tumor or a cyst or a growth that maybe wasn't even diagnosed. But it would just cause the healthy skin to rot away, essentially, and then eventually whatever it was. So there's actually a whole clinic in Texas, a woman down there who treats breast cancer using a bloodroot-based salve. Not for the faint of heart, but she claims it's worse than chemotherapy. So anyway, just herbal trivia. But it's also a very antibiotic, or it has antibiotic properties. And in Europe, they buy it and grind it up and put it in animal feed instead of giving them antibiotics. And it also is very helpful for inflammation in the mouth. If any of you remember, there used to be a mouthwash called Viadent, and it was red. It was red because it was colored with bloodroot. But this is kind of a toxic herb. You really have to know how to use it. It's very potent. Some people do use it internally. There's history of it being ground up and used as a snuff for sinus infection. I did that once. I never have felt anything like that in my life. My sinuses were completely open, and I was awake for a long time after that. So it does work. If I had had sinus congestion, I'm sure it would have been gone afterwards, but I don't really recommend it. Historical interest only. Yellow root. Xanthorrhiza simplicissima. This is really a true endemic of the southern Appalachians. It plays a really key role in forest ecology. You can see in both of these pictures it's along creeks. So it stabilizes branches and creek banks so that when we have this torrential rains that we have, they don't all wash away. So in that picture on the right, you can see the creek, and then in this one, you can see the water flowing behind it. This is, if any of you have ever used golden seal, that herb golden seal, when I first moved to the South and I was learning about plants, one of my friends who knew a lot more than me, she said, okay, I'll explain how to use this. Redneck golden seal. So it's got a lot of the same properties of golden seal, but it's milder. So what it does is it's antifungal, it's antibacterial. So people would use it as a mouthwash or a wash on skin wounds to clean them out. It's really good for thrush or any kind of fungal condition. You can make a tea out of it and soak your feet in it. You have to do it repeatedly because it contains a compound that's called, an alkaloid that's called berberine, and that's what makes it yellow. So this is the stem of the plant with the bark scraped off. And this is actually technically a shrub because it's a woody plant. But if you go, sometimes you stop at a roadside vegetable stand and people will be selling what looks like just a bundle of sticks with a piece of jute tying it together, and it'll be yellow wood. One of my neighbors told me that he had used it, he could share some information with me. So, I got my notebook, I was being really studious, I was like, I'm ready to go. And he goes, well, you use it when you're feeling puny. And that was it. That was it. And I had, being a Yankee and moving to the South, I wasn't sure what the symptoms associated with puny were. But, it's just when you just don't feel like yourself, and especially when your digestion is not feeling good. You're feeling a little, gassy or bloated or something. And this is one of the uses of this plant, is to just take a taste of it in your mouth. Because it's, actually, I don't know if you know this, but anytime you taste something bitter, the bitter reflex on your tongue, when it's activated by that flavor, causes all these secretions to occur throughout your body and primarily in your digestive system. So if any of you have ever been to Germany or been to a German restaurant, you'll see they'll sell little bottles of digestive bitters. And after you eat a meal like sauerbraten or something really heavy and rich, if you take a little bit of a digestive bitter or even just let something bitter taste register on your tongue, it improves digestion and elimination. So sometimes when people they're really sleepy after they eat, they're really bloated, maybe some gas, a little reflux, having a taste of something bitter after a meal will reorient digestion and get everything moving in the right direction. That's why sometimes you crave a cup of coffee after Thanksgiving dinner. It's like, you've had all these flavors and fats and everything, and then you drink a little bit of bitter coffee and everything starts to move. So this is one of the ways the stems and the roots of yellow root were used. Even at the DeKalb Farmers Market in Atlanta, they sell bundles of yellow root sticks that would be boiled up. Not for the faint of heart. You have to be dedicated for the bitterness because it's not a beverage to you. And you can't sweeten it if you want to get that bitter effect. So that's the yellow root. So now this is an example of a plant that's happier farther south, and this is about as far north as it's going to be happy. You do see it other places a little farther north, but it doesn't thrive. In Georgia, I don't know about North Carolina, but in Georgia, passion flower is categorized as a noxious weed. I did my master gardener training many years ago, and there's one horrifying class that's all about how to kill weeds. And it's like all my best friends, it was like dandelion, chickweed, land sporters, one after another. Here's how you kill it, here's how you kill that. And I was traumatized at the end. These were like all the things I was giving people to help them to get healthy. And these guys were going around pumping like toxic chemicals on them. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I want to talk about the plants. But so passion flower is a spectacularly beautiful flower. It's a vine. Who has seen this? Anybody here seen it? A lot of you have seen it. The first time I saw this was alone on a fence on a street, and I actually stopped to see how they attached those plastic flowers to the vine because I was like, this could not be real. There are a lot of different species, a lot of different colors. When I was in Hawaii, I saw red passion flowers. I think there's about 30 different species. But this is a recipe for wonderful sleep you're looking at right here. This is one of the best herbs for sleep. It's, you know, when we think about things that affect the nervous system, we can think about things that just relax the nervous system, like chamomile. And then we can think about things that sedate the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. So some herbs, and this herb will do that to some degree. It's like after you drink it, your heart slows down and your breathing deepens. It's a specific for people who have a lot of tension in their body when they get in bed at night. It's almost hard for them to lay flat. But it will soothe and ease and deepen the quality of your sleep. So it can be used as a tea, it can be used as a tincture. And just as a tip, if you're somebody who would like help sleeping, you know, dosing of herbs is often very mysterious. With an herb like this, either drinking the tea or having tincture, which is an alcohol extract that you can buy at health food stores, you have to take it about an hour before you want to go to sleep, and then take a second dose at bedtime. So what you're doing is you're cueing your nervous system. We're going to go to bed in an hour. We're going to bed now. And then I usually would tell people to have a third dose in a glass of water next to the bed, and after, instead of doing that thing like, I am sleeping, I'm not, I'm awake, no, yeah, no, I'm falling asleep. Just when you realize that it's not happening, you have another dose. And sometimes it takes your nervous system a week or so to get the memo, but it is a really phenomenal sleeper. But one other fun fact about passion flower is that it produces what's called maypops. So these little fruits, so these are about the size of a hen's egg. And when they ripen and they turn yellow like the one on the right there, they have inside of them this gel and these edible seeds, so that's what you see cut open there, that usually they're described as ambrosia-like. It tastes kind of like custard with a little mango and maybe a hint of cherry and strawberry. So you can take the ripe ones and scoop out the inside, and you could use it, like I had a really good cheesecake that was made with passion flower fruits mixed into the mixture. People make jam out of it. People stand there and just eat it. But if you see it, one time, I think it was you and I, Brent, we were kayaking on the Little Tennessee, and we got out to go to that mound, and there was a field, like 5 acres, and it was nothing but passion flowers. And it was kind of like that scene in Wizard of Oz with the poppies, you know, you can just imagine sleeping there. Anyway, this is really common, it's sustainable, if you're never going to take too much of it if you harvest it, and it's really beautiful if you have some sort of trellis or something that you want to grow it on. This is one that maybe you have never really paid attention to, lobelia. It's about this tall, about a foot, maybe a little over a foot tall, and it has very small blue flowers. And you can see on the right how small, so those leaves are about the size of a basil leaf, and how small those flowers are. And then I'm giving you a close-up of the flowers as well. This is one of the most notorious North American plants. Before germ theory was accepted as a fact, which it's always important to remind ourselves, that didn't happen until right around 1900. You know, people didn't really understand pathogens and bacteria and viral infections, which was unfortunate because a lot of people died as a result of, a doctor going from one patient to the next and things like that. But before that occurred, probably from time immemorial, but definitely in the 1800s, there was a whole school of medicine in North America that was kind of jokingly referred to as the Pucum and Purgem School of Medicine, because what they believed is that if you could get someone to have to vomit and to have empty their bowels, whatever the thing was that was inside of them would go away, would be pushed out. And so, for example, George Washington, medical historians believe that he died because he was being bled, cut to get blood out of his body, and given lobelia tea in high doses until the point that it killed him. He was so weakened by the treatment. I don't know what the original problem was. But anyway, lobelia was the plant that these Purgem and Pucum doctors used. They would make a tea out of it, and then they would just give it to the person, so it's an emetic. And Samuel Thompson was this particular doctor who had a patient die. He was up in the Northeast, and he was convicted. He was charged with murder, and there was a big trial, and it was news everywhere that he had killed someone using lobelia and these other treatments. He was acquitted, but everyone stopped using it for obvious reasons. But it has a lot of really amazing properties, and I just came from an herb conference, and we had a whole lecture on the research that's being done on some of the compounds in this plant. In the picture on the right, you can see those, that looks like little balloon-shaped things. So that's why it has the species name inflata. It looks like little inflated balloons. And there are seeds in there that contain a compound called lobeline. And lobeline chemically is almost exactly the same as nicotine. So this is used to help people who are trying to break an addiction to nicotine by fooling their body, by taking a little bit of lobelia, and then their body kind of goes, oh, okay, I'm okay. And then, the more they can do that, the farther they move away from the addiction that they're experiencing. Medicinally, we do use it too. It causes the bronchial tubes to relax. So this is used kind of like an herbal inhaler for somebody who has asthma or is having an allergic reaction. I'm just giving them a few drops of it, and the bronchioles open, and the wheezing stops. So one of its common names was Indian tobacco, because it was being, Cherokees and other tribes smoked it. It's a mild euphoric. It's not like smoking, but it is a relaxing kind of herb because your respiratory system sort of calms down. So it is used to intervene on breathing issues, but you have to be really dosage specific, or then you have the Purgem and Pucum response. But it's a really common plant around here. It's not abundant, but it grows in clumps. And then it has a couple cousins that live in the area. So this one is called greater lobelia. It blooms a little later in the summer, kind of in September usually. And it's a much larger, more robust plant. If you're out hiking around or in the woods, you may see it has these clusters of flowers that are, maybe 3/4 of an inch, and they're dark purple. Guess what they thought this plant could do? Anyone? Syphilis cure. It was, there was hope, but it did not deliver. But when they really thought that at first, they made the species name Syphilitica. Just as another little, I don't have a slide of sassafras, but I feel fairly certain most of you know what sassafras looks like. The first colonists in Jamestown were taxed in sassafras roots, and they were exported to Europe, where they were made into a strong tea with milk and sugar that was called saloup. And it was considered, it was like the latte of its day. Not the latte now, the latte in the 80s. You know, when it was like, a latte? Oh my God! You know, this is so exciting. And people, like in Paris and in London, would go to cafes to drink sassafras root tea. But then somebody started using it in a clinical setting to treat syphilis, and then nobody wanted to be seen in public. But it was one of the first taxes imposed on the colonists, was that they were required, Jamestown colony was required to harvest a certain amount of sassafras root to export to Europe every year. So, and then this is another lobelia that you may be more familiar, right? So the cardinalis, totally different, I mean a similar kind of flower. I don't know of any medicinal use for this, but you often see this growing in ditches in the late summer, and it's quite dramatic with these really brilliant red flowers. This is one that you find around creeks and ponds. It's a plant that we say likes to have its feet wet. And it's pretty distinctive. It's about 2.5 feet tall, but it has leaves that meet and surround the stem. Do you see that in the picture on the left, how the leaves connect? And that's why it has the species named perforatum, because it looks like it's perforating the leaf. So it's really easy to identify. And it has these white flowers, a little close-up of what the flowers, nothing that, not that gorgeous. They're kind of bedhead flowers, in my opinion. They're kind of rumpled. But this was probably one of the most important, the wrong way, most important plants for hundreds of years, because it was a remedy for colds and flu. So it reduces fever, it increases expectoration, so it helps you get congestion broken up and moved out of the body. And it also is antiviral, and it's analgesic. So it's kind of like the equivalent of taking an ibuprofen when you have a cold. It lasts about 3 or 4 hours. But there was a book that was written kind of in the middle of the Civil War by a man named Francis Porcher. He was actually the Surgeon General for the Confederacy. And because there were blockades of all the ports, he was ordered to write a field guide for the hospitals that were all over the South for the soldiers about what to harvest from the field and forest to use as medicine. And it's one of the most comprehensive herbals about plants of this region, because they were desperate. They couldn't get things from the north or from Europe. And Francis Porcher, in his book, he says, if you need this, just ask any housewife, because no housewife who's worth her weight would let winter arrive without having this drying in her attic. So it stimulates the immune system, it breaks up congestion, relieves coughs, helps reduce fever. So this is a plant that a lot of people use during COVID to treat COVID symptoms. Very safe. I wouldn't give it to someone who was pregnant because it's too strong. And good luck ever giving it to a child because it's bitter. But it's really effective. And I can really understand why people valued it and went out of their way to make sure they always had some. It's got a bitter flavor, but one of the things that's interesting about it is that when you're sick and you drink this tea, you're like, this isn't bad. But when you're not sick and you drink it, you're like, are you trying to kill me? So there's some, our bodies know how to deal with these plants. So it's all the aerial parts of this plant that are used. And then this is its cousin, Joe Pyeweed, or this is also called Queen of the Meadow or gravel root. These plants on the right here are about 14 feet tall. And you've probably seen this. It's everywhere in the fields. The first time I saw it, I was driving over by Lookout Mountain, and I kept seeing, it was in the fall, and I kept seeing this one plant kind of sticking up above all the others. And then all of a sudden I heard Queen of the Meadow, and I was like, that's Queen of the Meadow. There's several different species. I also, if you are a really plant-oriented. In older books, it's going to be referred to as the genus Eupatorium, but it was changed a few years ago to Eutrochium. But there's several different species of it that are found here in the South. And this, one of the things that's distinctive about this is the way the leaves are arranged around the stem. So there's not many plants, and 14 feet tall is your other cue. Right? The root of this plant breaks up and prevents kidney stones, which is why it's called gravel root. It's still used in herbal practice all over the world, but people grow it and commercially and sell it because it does really help. If somebody's in the throes of passing a kidney stone, or they have a tendency to, they can take it every day, and it reduces the tendency to do that. As an aside, the other herb that works really well for that, if you're someone prone to kidney stones, is, and this is so simple, fresh parsley. I had a client one time who had a long history of kidney stones. She had lithotripsy several times, which is a really invasive procedure where they send these vibrations into your kidneys to try to break up the stones. And she just started having a half a cup of chopped fresh parsley every day. She would just have a salad, or she'd put it on baked potatoes or whatever. That was the end of her kidney stones. So that's a free piece of advice that may or may not work for you. But the stems of this plant, between these leaf nodes where the leaves are attached, it's hollow. So if you cut it below each one, and a friend of mine, David Winston, who is a Buddhist, was adopted by a Cherokee family when he was in his late teens, told me that what they used that for is they would cut those stems so that it was a hollow, like a straw, and then the Cherokee would blow prayers into the medicines they made. So speaking the prayer into that tube, and they called it bubbling the medicine. It would make bubbles come up, and it would be infusing it with the intention of healing for that person. Children like to use them as pea shears. They're perfect for that. So it's the root of this plant that's used. The aerial parts, the leaves, will help reduce fevers and coughs a little bit if you didn't have anything else. I only have a few more. I know this is supposed to end at 7:30, but I'm going to just do like 3 more. Okay, all right. I didn't know if like everyone had a party to go to. So this is the only fungi that I'm talking about tonight, but this is a really common one in this region. It's Ganoderma, and there's several different species. So this is a tree that I came across some years ago that was covered with these mushrooms. Some of you may know artist conch, which is another type of Ganoderma that people collect off of trees and carve into it. But this one is distinctive because it has a little bit of a stem. So can you see on the left there the darker part that sort of sticks out? The ones that are similar, polypores, or shelf fungus is what this is called, because it sticks out from the tree like a shelf. And polypore because, and you see this white blob down here, that's one of the mushrooms turned over. It doesn't have gills, it has pores. So poly means many in Greek, so polypore means it has a lot of pores on it, and it's white on the backside. This is another one that kind of bridges the two cultures. Here in the Appalachians, this was used as boiled as a tea and drunk for strength, similar to ginseng. But in China, this is called the mushroom of longevity, the mushroom of immortality. And it does an amazing array of things to keep someone healthy. So first of all, it protects the heart. So one of the things that is dangerous for the heart is, guess what? Stress. So when you're stressed or you're anxious and your heart reacts and it beats harder, if that's something that's happening constantly, it weakens the heart. So this herb, this fungi really protects the heart and it makes it strong. This also modulates the immune system. So some of you may have heard about autoimmune conditions. So an autoimmune condition is when someone's immune system starts to attack the body because it thinks it's foreign matter. So what our immune system is designed to do is identify pathogens, bacteria, viral infections, and eliminate them, right? Kill them. Don't let them in the body. So when somebody has an autoimmune condition, their immune system can't distinguish between self and other, and it starts attacking itself. So someone who has rheumatoid arthritis and they get like really swollen, deformed joints as a result of that, it's because their immune system is attacking the joints. It's overactive. So people can have an overactive immune system or a deficient immune system. If it's deficient, you get everything that comes around, right? You don't have any protection. This herb is considered an immune modulator. So if it's too active, it'll downregulate it. If it's too weak, it'll upregulate it. So you don't even have to know what's going on. You could just say, this would be a great herb for someone to take. And then the last thing there's also a lot of research on it in terms of cancer prevention and treatment. I don't have the specific information to share with you, but if you email me, I could give it to you, that when people take reishi mushroom and they're undergoing chemotherapy, for some types of chemo, it makes it more effective with less side effects. And in China, they've done a ton of research on how to get the benefits of chemo without all the side effects. And the main thing they use is medicinal mushrooms to counter that activity. But the last thing that this thing does is it calms the spirit. So in Chinese medicine, they believe that when somebody experiences trauma, physical or emotional, or the news, it disturbs their soul. And it makes you agitated and anxious and hard to sleep and hard to concentrate. And this is a very common thing that people have after trauma or loss. So someone close to you dies, and you just don't feel like you're in your body. You're just a little dissociated. This was a specific herb to bring somebody's spirit fully anchored back into their body. And, again, our Western medical system, conventional medicine, does not acknowledge a body-mind connection for physical symptoms. In Chinese medicine, they do. So they would give this to somebody who had ADD or ADHD, or somebody who had trouble just remembering things, or somebody who had poor sleep because they had disturbing dreams that were really upsetting and would wake them up, or they'd wake up in the morning with that lingering feeling of having been in a bad situation. So anyway, the mushroom of immortality, it's really a spectacular thing. If you do find these in the woods, there's a lot of them on the dead hemlocks now. They do get infected with bugs fairly quickly, so you really have to examine them if you're going to pick them. And they're also unbelievably hard. If you buy these commercially as a medicine, they've dried them and cut them with a bandsaw into these strips. So when you find it fresh, you have to get an axe and chop it up right away. And then usually we boil it to get the action. We don't eat the mushroom itself. But anyway, this one is really dramatic, and when you see it in the woods, it really stands out. This is one of my favorites. They're all my favorites, but turtlehead or balmony, this one grows also along stream banks, and it has these little flowers that people thought look like the head of a turtle. And the one on the right is a cultivar at the Chicago Botanical Gardens. They get a hold of these native plants and then gussy them up and then sell them places for display. But the aerial parts of this plant were used as a digestive bitter. So the thing I said earlier about if you taste something bitter, it improves your gut secretions and your digestion. So people would make a little tea out of it and drink it before or after meals. Not a lot, like even a shot glass full, but just to get the digestion moving. I'm on a personal campaign to make people like goldenrod and take it seriously, and not just think it's like cheap and abundant, because it's everywhere. We have about 30 species of goldenrod in the eastern part of North America. Some of them bloom fairly early, some of them bloom closer to frost. They're all used exactly the same. And this is the one that a lot of people think is making them sneeze, but it's not. It's ragweed, which blooms at the same time. Ragweed has green flowers that you would never even notice. And one thing about pollen that causes allergic reaction is it's only pollen from plants who require wind to distribute their pollen. And they usually don't have showy flowers because they don't need to attract pollinators. So ragweed has these green flowers you wouldn't even notice were there, as opposed to goldenrod, which is, really dramatic. So here's the kicker. Goldenrod relieves the symptoms of ragweed. Tell everybody. So if you make a tea out of goldenrod, it's an anti-inflammatory for the upper respiratory system. So if you have a runny nose, you have itchy eyes, you have a little cough, and you drink goldenrod tea, leaf and flower, it's very pleasant tasting, it'll reduce that inflammation. It also is very soothing to the urinary tract. So if someone's got a cystitis or a bladder infection and they drink goldenrod tea, it will soothe those irritated tissues. In the 1800s, definitely down in Raymond County, and I would imagine up here as well, when there were a lot of guest houses and people would come up on the train to Tallulah Falls and then go somewhere and stay in a guest house, they would serve what they called Blue Mountain tea. And it was one of the species of goldenrod, Solidago odora, which has kind of a licorice scent. And it would be kind of like the equivalent of ginseng. It's like you go to the mountain, have the fresh air, walk every day, and drink Blue Mountain tea to restore yourself. So that's a little goldenrod. And then elder. This is one that had its 15 minutes of fame during COVID because there has been some really specific research done on the the berries of elder, and it is a strong antiviral medication. So that's why when you go into a health food store, you see all this elderberry syrup. During COVID, you couldn't even find elderberries online in any of the suppliers because everyone was trying to make it and have it. And it's actually, well, you combine it with some honey, but you can make a syrup out of it and just have a tablespoon every day, and it acts as a protectant for your, strengthens your immune system so that you're not so vulnerable, especially to viral infections. Also, it's a great thing. Kids will usually take it. So it's a good preventative for colds. The flowers are used medicinally as kind of a cold tea to make you sweat and to help you cough. But elders are very common here. They also kind of grow where you would see those devil's walking sticks at sort of the transition zones along the woods. But all the parts of the elder are used medicinally. So I got two more. This one is partridge berry, which the leaves there are about the size of a pea, and then the berries are also like a little fat pea. This one is blooming right now, and here's a picture I took a couple days ago at Tallulah Gorge Park because it's flowering. But those flowers are like this big. And it grows, it's a vine that grows in a mass. This was in a lot of the older herbals as squaw vine, because the Europeans observing the native women collecting it weren't that curious, and all they knew is the squaws, which is actually a very derogatory term, were harvesting it. And so there was also a movement about 20 years ago to call this partridge berry, which is a much more respectful name. But I am told that even birds don't eat the berries because they don't have any flavor. They're like white and mealy inside. This is what we call famine food. It has nutrition, you could eat it, but you wouldn't let, there's no flavor involved with it. The aerial parts, all the vine parts, are what are used. And this is something that was given to women to prepare them for conception, and also to give it to women who have a history of repeated miscarriages or difficulty conceiving. So it's a tonic for the female generative system. But I just love these little flowers. I was down there laying on the ground taking these pictures as people walked by me. Nobody even asked. You know, nobody asked. I guess they could tell I was conscious, so they didn't think about it. Okay, the last one I want to talk to you about is wild ginger. So we have two different types of wild ginger that grow here, but they have the most remarkable flowers. So you see this on the picture on the right, the photograph, and then the drawing on the left. Wild ginger is pollinated by beetles, certain types of beetles. So it has its flowers laying on the ground and kind of like a carport, you know, so the beetles can come back in. But the root of this plant is like a mild version of the tropical ginger that we can buy in the grocery store. So it was used to settle the stomach, just like we use ginger, and as a flavoring agent. This is not being grown or used commercially at all, but if you had some and you wanted to try it, and then there's another species that grows here that is evergreen. So if you were out in the winter, you would see this one. It's called, sometimes referred to as little brown jugs or hearts and pigs because of the way the flowers look like snouts. So those are the flowers on the right. And this one would be there in the winter. This one is deciduous. It fades away at the end of the season and then comes back. But also, just as an aside, the partridge berry is also evergreen. It's there all winter. So you might see a partridge berry along with the Hexastylus genus of ginger in the woods. Now that I've told you all my secrets, I have to now give you the lecture that harvesting any plants in the wild requires some responsibility. So you should definitely, it's kind of hard to see now with the sun, but look up the conservation status of plants, even if they're just growing on your property. A lot of times it takes plants a long time to establish even a small showing. And if you come along and go, oh my God, that's that plant she was talking about. And usually we say things like, don't, if you have 10 plants, harvest 2. Then sometimes people ask me, what happens when you dig up the roots? The plant is dead. That's the answer to that question. It doesn't live any longer. But I do invite you to learn a little more about these plants if there's something. You can also, there's an organization called United Plant Savers that has lots of resources on native medicinal, how to harvest them in a way that doesn't damage plant populations. So now you have the responsibility and obligation, if you want to use any of these plants, to learn a little bit about that. Also, all of our botanical gardens, a lot of our native plant organizations can help you learn how to identify plants and also harvest them in a way that is safe for the plants and for you. That's the conclusion of my prepared remarks. I'll be happy to answer questions if anyone has anything they want to ask about. Yeah.
I have a question that I just read in the Cherokee Herbal, that red lavella. How do this one?
It does have a little bit, yeah. It's pretty mild, you know. So the question was about the Lobelia cardinalis, the red flowered plant that it does have. You know, all plants have a little bit of some kind of activity, and when people didn't have a wide range of things to choose from, you know, they would use a lot of things that now we wouldn't bother with because, like, we know that the other Lobelia is stronger. So like the Cherokee people were referring to, excellent work, like we know what we're talking about, but not necessarily reliable results. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about barberry.
Barberry?
You're talking about yellow root, and I know barberry has a yellow root. Does that have any of the same constituents?
So she's asking about the plant barberry. There is, genus name is. It also has the berberine in it, but it's a little more oriented towards the kidneys specifically. So there are some plants that go to a specific part of the body. We call them just a system-specific plants. So some things have an impact on the respiratory system, some like the partridge berry, the female generative system. So with barberry, it's more of a kidney-oriented.
How would you prepare, I mean, would you use the root of the barberry or?
You know, I have never used it,
Okay.
so I don't want to make anything up. I could. And I could say it with total authority, you believe me, but
I had another question about reishi,
about what?
the mushroom reishi.
Reishi?
I have some mushrooms on an old log in my yard,
Yeah.
and they were gray. I thought they were turkey tails.
Uh-huh.
Would that be
Turkey tails is another type of mushroom. It's got brown and gray and striations on it,
Yeah.
and it's white on the underside, and it's a shelf fungus like reishi, but it's very pliable. It's like a little piece of leather. There's been a lot of research about turkey tail in cancer prevention and also potentiating cancer therapies. And you know, the United States, the research that's done on plants in the United States is focused on one thing: identifying a chemical compound that can be created in a laboratory and sold as a drug. Every place else in the world, when they do herb research, how to use the herb. So Iran, India, Germany, China, they're doing all this research on whole plant medicine to learn, to have a better understanding how to use the plants as medicines. In the United States, like with the lobelia, they're doing all this research on lobeline, the one compound. And what we know, herbalists who know everything, is that when you start taking plant compounds apart, you start having side effects. If you use a plant with all the compounds that are in it naturally, it often has, has a lot of healing potential synergistically. So, anyone else? Questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Flatleaf and curly parsley, they the same thing.
I'm sorry, flatleaf and curly parsley can be used exactly the same. Yeah.
Was there, I work for a vitamin company.
A what company?
A vitamin company.
A vitamin company. Mm-hmm.
And they're saying now that berberine is actually works to help with your body, with like diabetes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the question was about using berberine-containing plants to regulate blood sugar, right?
Right.
Yeah, they do. They do regulate. And also, everything I told you about bitters, the taste of bitter in your mouth, which is what berberine is really bitter, it slows down that emptying of your stomach, and it regulates so your blood sugar doesn't spike after you eat. It just changes the way your body takes nutrients and excretes them into the bloodstream. And that's what, so the pancreas calms down, right? Because it's not getting triggered by fluctuations in glucose levels. And any bitter herb is going to do that to some degree. Yeah.
When you make an old fashioned,
Yeah.
bitters in there, is that the same thing as bitters?
It's therapeutic.
So you can take it apart, you can put it in.
No, ma'am. You do not want to take that apart. You want to keep that all together and sip it responsibly. Yeah, Negronis do the same thing. I mean, we could go down the list. Yeah.
I was going to ask, is reishi only found on hemlock trees?
No.
Or are there what other species?
Good question. So reishi isn't only found on dead hemlocks. It's hardwoods. I've seen it on oaks. I've seen it on the base of apple trees. But it really likes hemlocks, especially all the gray ghosts we have now with the dead hemlocks. Yeah.
That doesn't affect the
No. No.
Somebody over there.
Oh yeah. Somebody over there? Yeah. Go ahead.
The plants that Are they all native plants?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, that's what Susan told me, she's not going there. Okay, oh, yeah.
When I was in my early 20s, my granny taught me about yellow root,
Mhm,
and I used to get real bad acid reflux.
mhm,
You'd say, go down to the creek, get some yellow root, and bring it back, make tea out of it.
mhm.
Well, I found out you're not supposed to drink it from her, but I drank it anyway, and it didn't hurt me at all.
You found out it was what?
You're not supposed to drink it, you're supposed to use it like an oral rinse.
Oh, like an oral rinse.
But it never hurt me.
Yeah, so his comment is his granny told him to go make yellow root tea, and what she was suggesting is, basically what she was suggesting is what I was talking about, that you were getting that bitter reflex triggered.
And lumps that pop up in your mouth.
Exactly, yeah, and it helps with any kind of mouth ulcers or like that, but he drank it. But actually, you just got more benefit from it, but good on you that you drank it, my God.
Well, I'm from these mountains, so.
You already had some of your blood. All right, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for